social upheaval here. A female born today has a 40% chance of living to 150. So the potential for this range of new technologies on the health side is absolutely stupendous.
I think the systematic application of tools we now have or can acquire over the next 10 to 20 years can increase the average lifespan by another 20 to 30 years, so that most people can expect to live a healthy life of 110 to 115 years.
There's going to be a lot of population pressure pushing into Europe from the overpopulating Middle East and from the overpopulating Africa. And at the same time, populations of old people will create huge fiscal strains. People are going to have to radically rework the welfare state on the fly.
I had no idea that anything could ever be done to reverse the effects of a stroke. I had never heard of stem cells. What we're watching here is actually a miracle, really.
I think this is possibly the most exciting time that one could imagine in the biological sciences.
We're talking about breakthrough technology platforms like telomerase and embryonic stem cells and regenerative medicine. This is going to change the world.
What is the context in which the fruits of this technology will be best shared by humanity as a whole?
When do people need governments and policymakers? When do they need to start thinking about this?
Yesterday, because this technology is real.
Paul Hewitt is a director at the CSIS, an organization that's advised America's State Department, its military, the CIA, and every US administration of the last 40 years.
CSIS has always been involved in national security and economic security issues. CSIS has a sense that the ability to protect the national security encompasses more than just military tanks and planes.
What has grabbed Paul Hewitt's attention is a development first reported in a Channel 4 documentary 3 years ago. That film showed experiments that it claimed would change the world forever, a claim that seemed so outrageous at the time that it was dismissed as exaggeration. We have within us, lying almost dormant, stem cells, the cells that built our bodies in the first place. The scientists believe that even in adult life, the stem cell system can be switched on and made to grow brand new human heart, brain, and muscle tissue.
The body is built on stem cells. It knows how to regulate the stem cells and the products coming from stem cells. So that's why I think this could be and should be a major medical advance.
3 years later, what was dismissed as commercial hype is now real.
I see patients with motor neuron disease, both adults and children, and with spinal cord disorders. Their interest is, listen, I've just been diagnosed. I have been given a death sentence of 2 to 5 years.
Doug Kerr believes stem cells will allow him to make the lame walk.
So what we've done is we take rats and we infect them with a virus. So we give the virus into the brain, and what the virus does is it infects neurons in the brain and spinal cord and results in the permanent paralysis due to death of motor neurons in the spinal cord. And so you can see that this animal has a significant, fairly profound weakness of its hind limbs. And this will last forever. Well, let me show you what happens when we transplant these cells into an animal. This is one of our animals that is now 6 months post-transplantation.
That's pretty impressive.
It is. And he is clearly better. What I think you can see is that he is able to get his limbs under him. So he can not only support his weight in a standing phase, but can use them to start to push off. What we did is when this animal was at its worst, most paralyzed, which we saw in the other animal, we do a surgery on that animal. We then inject these cells into the spinal fluid, which surrounds and bathes the spinal cord. And the first question was, well, where do they go? If they just stay in the spinal fluid, they're not going to do as much good. And so one critical question which we've now answered is that they go to the area where the cells are dying, but they don't tend to go to other areas of the spinal cord which are relatively unaffected. The second question is, well, what do they turn into? Do they turn into neurons? And the answer to some degree is yes. So some of them exhibit features 3 and 6 months out of mature neurons.
One of the things that makes Doug Kerr's experiment so extraordinary is that the cells he injects are embryonic stem cells that normally make ovaries. Yet Kerr's experiments show, when injected around the injured spinal cord, some signal transforms the cells into neurons.
All of a sudden, we really are faced with this belief that the functional recovery could only have been because of the delivery of live cells into the spinal cord. I think all of these animal models really are essentially proofs of principle. And it's a really big proof of principle. It's something which was unimaginable even 5 years ago.
Although Doug Kerr's experiments have so far been only in animals, they are a clear foretaste of what's to come. He already has plans for human trials next year. Nerve damage is the basis of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and stroke, diseases which destroy the lives of millions of people every year.
Well, she was a little thinner than she is now, but she had these beautiful dimples and the blue eyes and a wonderful smile. She captivated me from the moment I saw her. I'm going to break up, I'm afraid.
In December 1993, Sylvia Elam had a stroke. It completely paralyzed her down her right side.
One morning, July the 2nd, 1998, reading my morning newspaper, I ran across this story about an operation being performed at the University of Pittsburgh where they injected neurons grown from a stem cell, taken from a cancer, and inject them into this lady's brain, and they were hoping that those neurons would make connections back so the woman would get some improvement.
This was the operation we featured 3 years ago, the very first human trial on 12 volunteers. Mrs. Elam was the last patient. It was hoped that injected cells would grow new tissue to replace what the stroke had destroyed.
This is Mrs. Elam, 4 months after surgery.
Before her cell implant, Sylvia Elam had had no movement in her right leg and arm for 5 years.
3.5, 4 months after the operation. We pulled up in the grocery store one evening. I had to run in and get something. She said, I want to go in the grocery store with you. And I said, no, I don't want to have to get the wheelchair out of the vehicle and put you in it and take you in and all this. I just wanted to go in and get a few things.
Oh, man.
So I went on in the grocery store and I went back to the vegetable section, which was about 200 feet from the front door. And I looked around and here he was behind me with Sylvia. I said, you walked all the way from the car to here? You could have fell down. She says, no. She says, I want to get something for myself.
Yeah. I just know I can do it.
I think another occasion.
How did that feel?
Wonderful. Wonderful. I knew I had done it. It really did happen.
I knew at that point that she was going to be independent again.
But at the height of her recovery, Sylvia had a second stroke.
Had nothing to do with where the first stroke occurred nor the operation. Without that operation, the second stroke probably would have ended her life. But with the improvement she had from the operation, she was able to survive the second stroke. What we're watching here is actually a miracle, really, because she shouldn't even be doing this, particularly after having the second stroke. But she can do it.
In the trial, 7 out of the 12 improved, and no one was harmed. A second trial is already underway. So far, this is one experiment to treat stroke, but the promise of stem cells to treat all the neural diseases of senility is clear. And while that's great news for us individually, it's staggeringly great news for whole economies.
If you could cure senility, if there were a single cure, or you could get the whole panoply of cures that would keep people sharp as a tack for virtually the whole of their lives, you would have huge impacts on the future costs of old age in societies, to the tune of 3 or 4% of GDP, perhaps by 2050. Eliminating the need for long-term care would be one of the most profoundly important budgetary breakthroughs that we could make in aging societies. Then, of course, we would have the problem of finding out what to do with productive old people, or with sharp-minded old people, and I think it's the right kind of problem to have.
As we age, it's not just our minds, but our bodies as well that degenerate. Using stem cells to repair our brains would rid us of senility. But what good would that be if we died before we got old? The big killers, cancer and heart disease, each shorten people's lives by about 15 years.
There is no mechanism today to actually repair the heart. You can help it with drugs to function a little bit better, but you actually can't repair that damaged tissue.
Until now. Scientists at the biotech company Osiris are already experimenting with stem cells to do what conventional therapies cannot, to actually reverse and repair the damage done by a heart attack.
The classic model has been the pig. The pig heart is very similar in size and in function, and so we've used the pig as our model. We create a heart attack in the pig by putting a ligature that we tie off, so pretending it's a clot, and then after 1 hour we release, and the blood flow is reestablished. So this would simulate a fairly large heart attack in a human. When you have a heart attack, cells have died. scar comes in and replaces that muscle, and therefore the heart can no longer repair or function as well. These cells will go in and they will help the repair of that muscle, and they will improve the function of the heart, of the actual strength of the beating of the heart. That's what we've seen in the animal studies today, that the presence and addition of the mesenchymal stem cells after the heart attack essentially repairs the ability of that heart wall to pump and to therefore overcome the damage that's being done by the heart attack itself.
One of the unique and very beneficial things from our viewpoint of these stem cells is that they appear to be not recognized by the immune system, and the cells engraft very well. We see no rejection or inflammatory response. What that means is that you could have these cells available in hospitals or in cath labs, available at the time that the patient has the injury, and can be delivered very early on. That's amazing. Yeah, we think so.
The cells don't even have to be injected into the heart itself. They can be simply put into a vein and will be attracted to the area of damage by some chemical homing signal. Exactly as in the rat work, the stem cells know where to go and what to do.
So we've now shown this in animals, and we are shortly going to begin human trials in this area. So it's very, very exciting.
For us as individuals, a cure for heart disease would be a triumph. But for society, it could be a nightmare.
All of our investments in biotechnology are geared toward expanding longevity, and there's a lot of effort being made on every front. Over the next decade or two, you could substantially increase longevity to the point where you really do bankrupt your pension systems in fairly short order. But you don't just bankrupt your pension systems, you bankrupt whole economies. And I think this is it's the great moral hazard. In a sense, pension systems require people to die in order to be viable. If people don't die, then you're stuck with a lot of dependency and eventually an unsolvable fiscal crisis. I mean, I have talked to policymakers all around the world about their pension crises. Everybody knows that virtually every European country, Japan, even in the United States, we're going to have huge budget deficits, and nobody really wants to do anything about it until it hits that year. And in the year it hits, everybody will say, "Oh my God, the sky is caving in, and we have to do something."
But will we? Given that this crisis will be driven by our desire for what science promises us, having healthier lives and staving off death. That promise is based on more than stem cells as a cure for senility and heart failure. The underlying cell biology that's given us stem cells has also provided a powerful weapon against the other big killer, cancer. Andrew Merton has a rare and massive, deadly abdominal tumour. All conventional cancer treatment has failed to stop its rapid growth.
Dr. Judson said that was it, there's no more that they could do. I'd had the operations, I had the chemotherapy, that was it. So I knew then from that point those tumours were going to start to grow and grow and grow again, because that's what happened in the past. But this time there was going to be no operation to remove them and no chemotherapy to get rid of them.
Plus you couldn't have operations every 8 months.
No. So we knew then that I was going to have to just wait for these tumours to get as big as what they did before, or it did the first time, until eventually that would be it.
It was very high grade. It had all the nasty features, many dividing cells. We did a baseline scan of his abdomen and pelvis. This is the scan we did in September of 2000. To orientate you, this is taken in slices through the body like this, from top to bottom, and it's back, front, right, left. This is the liver, and virtually all of the stuff you can see that this is mid-grey colour is tumour, masses on masses, occupying almost the whole of the abdomen, 4 or 5 kilos of tumour, I would guess. Something like that. I mean, it's just immense. I have a picture here of a tumour just prior to removal. Essentially a lobulated mass attached to bowel with a very abundant blood supply, and that's a typical GIST tumour after it's been removed. Both physically and mentally, he was very close to dying. We would have estimated his survival in terms of weeks, not months.
When I was told, I just thought, all this finally it. Think, this is going to happen now. And I thought that's just not long enough to have time together.
Ordinarily, Andrew Merton could have expected another 30 years of life. Now he was forced to reflect about matters that most of us avoid.
We just used to go out to Cromer and sit on the cliffs, and all sorts of thoughts go through your mind, how insignificant, one person's life is, and all the people that have gone before and all the people to come, and when you boil down to it. And I think that helps you that helped me to come to terms with what was going on. As the days went by and as the weeks went by, I felt things were starting to come to a conclusion.
You can see your loved one going down this journey and you've got no control over it. You just want to do as much as you can the time you've got.
I was dealing with something that was very profound, and I was beginning to cope with what was going to happen to me. And then one evening, 6:30, the phone rang, and everything just changed. A phone call from Alison, Ian Judson's research nurse. Oh, we got this fast-tracking a new drug, a trial drug. We think, Ian Judson's put your name forward. We think you're very suitable for it. We'd like you to come down for tests.
I thought immediately, this is somebody who I want to give this opportunity to. I want to give him the possibility of benefiting from this drug.
For me, I'd reached the end. And so I turned it down.
I said I'd get him there, no matter what. I'd go by train, get a wheelchair. In the end, I just said to him, look, if you don't go and you've gone, after that I will always wonder, what if?
And what happened when you took the tablet?
Well, overnight really. I woke up the next morning, and prior to that I could manage about, half a Weetabix, I suppose.
Yeah,
and then I really had to force it down. I woke up that morning, the following morning, I took the tablets, was it midnight, I think? The Thursday. I woke up the Friday morning, round comes in, breakfast, fancy breakfast, and I thought, I feel a bit peckish, I'll have a couple of Weetabix. I ate them. I thought, that's nice.
Cup of
tea. I could feel things moving around as though things were pulling apart.
That's how you described it.
As though I could feel things happening in there. And all of a sudden I'd lay there, something that sort of, I don't know, it's a hard, something that, it would click as though something would, I could feel as though, not a tear, but something moved, I don't know what it was. And after about 2 or 3 weeks I went back, and where it had swollen and hard, it had become soft.
And you could see it physically, gradually going down.
So I went back a week later, and just since then, how are you feeling? So I do feel quite a bit better. And then about 2 weeks after that, I remember him looking at me, he laid me on the bed, and you could actually see how it had gone.
Had you done the scans by then?
Well, he said I'll do some scans. He said, well, I don't need to do them because we can physically see and feel that they'd gone down.
How did Judson react to that?
He just went and sat down.
The first scan we did 2 months later in November, we knew that things were getting better because we could feel his abdomen was softer. But I don't think that we genuinely expected to see anything as dramatic as this. I mean, almost all of the tumour is gone. The tumour in the liver, well, it's still there, but there's a lot of black in it, suggesting that it's necrotic. It's gone softer. They can go negative within a day. They switch off. So a PET scan showing exactly where the tumours are can be positive one day and negative a day later. It's been a revelation. It's the most exciting thing that's happened in my entire medical career, just to be involved in this development. We can only explain it by virtue of the fact that the drug causes massive tumour cell apoptosis, so the tumour cells die.
This is another part of the power of cell signaling. What had astonished Ian Judson was that his drug had switched on a self-destruct program known as apoptosis, that all healthy cells have, but which in cancer is fatally switched off. The dream of finding which chemical signals tell which cancers to simply self-destruct had become real.
The apoptotic pathway is there waiting to happen. It's there waiting to be initiated if you could only take away the brake. So they must be on the verge, and you just push them over the edge, and it's fantastic.
In fact, from the moment he took the drug, it would have taken only 30 minutes for his cancer to begin to die.
The thing we've got to recognise is that this is a very rare tumour. We're talking about a few hundred people in the country each year who develop a tumour like this. But what's exciting is that it's a proof of principle. People thought it would take 20 years. It's happened in less than 10.
The power of using apoptosis to kill cancer, like using stem cells to repair a damaged heart, comes from its capacity to tap into the body's own mechanisms that keep a healthy balance between the birth, growth and death of its tissues. But this power to restore the balance within the body will increasingly disturb a larger balance, the passing of one generation to make way for the next.
It's natural for people to want to postpone death or alter it in some way by whatever means they have available. But there's a deeper question of, is that appropriate for the earth? What is more important, an individual survival or the survival of the society? And these technologies that have such a potential impact on the demographics of an individual versus a society need to be weighed in that light.
I think you have to start reshaping people's expectations of the future right now. The typical person goes into life expecting that their first 20 years or so they're going to get educated, be socialized. The next 40 years they're going to work, and then from then on they're going to retire and go to rot. The new paradigm is going to be very, very different. You're going to have periods of, you might have people working into their late 40s or 50s, getting another college education, and then working on into their 80s.
Whatever finance ministers like to pretend about state pensions today, in this future, there will be no retirement at 65.
For the mass majority of workers, the vast majority, jobs are dull and people can't wait to get out of them. They don't have skills which are particularly well needed. Nobody wants to work in a McDonald's at the age of 75, with aching knees and ankles and so forth.
If this was as far as the science went, then we'd have a long life, but a frail and decrepit one. However, just as stem cells can repair nerves and hearts, stem cells should be able to repair every other organ and tissue that degenerates with age. The company that uses stem cells to repair hearts has found the same stem cells can deal with arthritis as well.
One of the main contributors to arthritis is damage to a tissue that's actually in the middle of the knee, in the joint. And so it's just a little gel cushion that sits in between the knee, and it protects it when you walk. And as soon as you damage it, you no longer have that cushion anymore, and you start having bone on bone. There is no natural repair available for the meniscus today. If you've lost your meniscus, there aren't any strategies today that we know to completely regenerate it.
The belief that stem cells will be able to cure arthritis is being studied on the goat's knee, which is mechanically very much like our own.
So what we do is we open up the knee joint in these animals, we remove the tissue called the meniscus, and then we close the joint again. We give the animals 2 weeks to recover, and then we start them on this daily exercise protocol. So after about 12 weeks, these joints really have severe arthritis. The effect of delivering these cells into the knee joint is to regenerate new meniscal tissue. And that's very, very important, because now we restore the protective effect of this tissue, where previously the joint would have been exposed to all of these damaging forces. Now we have an opportunity to protect the knee joint again.
Within 3 months, the stem cells had regrown enough meniscus to cure the goat's arthritis.
The intention is to plan our first human studies in the very near future.
So we might make it to 120, sharp as a tack and physically robust.
James Vaupel, the respected head of the Max Planck Institute's demography program, likes to start out his speech by saying that a female born today has a 40% chance of living to 150. So the potential for this this range of new technologies in the health side is absolutely stupendous, but it opens up Pandora's box. Where do you take society?
Just in case you're still thinking this is only science fiction.
This is where we scale up the process from the laboratory scale to the industrial scale. In this room we have equipment that will purify and condition all of the air that goes to the GMP areas and the clean rooms.
This is a $3 billion company.
Here we have our process glycol pumps, glycol chillers. These are the air conditioning chillers. And in this room we have 2 water purification systems. The purified water comes upstairs and is used to generate pure steam and water for injection using this distillation unit. It's stored in these 2 10,000-liter vessels.
A large part of the excitement and confidence in regenerative medicine is that the scientists have already unlocked the body's cell signaling language. It will allow them to control every aspect of our cells and therefore of our aging, controlling the growth of stem cells, ordering the death of cancer cells.
What we're really after is the ability to control every cell at every stage, including stem cells. The key breakthrough for use of stem cells as medicine will come from the ability to direct their function by systematic application of the external signals it normally receives.
And it is those cell signals that Bill Hazeltine's company has separated out and now manufactures. At the heart of this factory are rooms of fermenters. Each fermenter grows a single strain of genetically modified bacteria. Each strain makes one of the cell signals in its pure form. This is a factory of cellular factories.
You need more liver cells? Send the natural signal, add the natural signal to the body that says liver cells expand. You need more heart cells? Add that signal. Well, we have discovered about 10,000 of these sequences, of these signals. We think it's the great majority, something like 85 to 90% of the total. And we've gained an understanding of the majority of those, sufficient to include in patent applications. So we have filed patent applications that describe more than 7,000 of those.
The genius of Bill Hazeltine's company was to find a way to identify all the chemical signals that control the birth, life, and death of our cells. In its full form, this knowledge would finally give us total mastery over every aspect of our aging and the power to defeat disease.
I think that systematic application of tools we now have or can acquire over the next 10 to 20 years can increase the average lifespan by another 20 to 30 years, so that most people can expect to live a healthy life of 110 to 115 years.
How long do you intend to live?
Well, as long as I'm healthy, which I hope is a good long time. I think it's possible. I'm in my mid-50s. I think it's possible to live well into my hundreds.
We have come so far in understanding the molecular basis of a disease and have invented such incredible technology to treat disease at its root that it justifies a new way of thinking about healthcare being a right of a citizen rather than a potential if he or she has economic access to it. So that's an easy thing to say, it's hard to actualize. Your country has experimented with that, with socialized medicine, and it has its problems. Our country has not yet done that. For Americans, there's access to health care, but it's not a fundamental right. You have to have money in order to get the kind of care we're talking about. And I think that's fundamentally flawed as we get closer and closer to the kind of revolutionary treatments we'll be talking about today. And if we haven't got the infrastructure to deliver that revolution to everybody who needs it, then we failed.
The problem with Dr. Okama's ethical concerns is that in the free market we don't have ethics. We have economics.
Even if it costs $2,000 or $3,000 to do one of these medical treatments that, potentially, of course, would be wonderfully beneficial and even cost-effective in the developing world. In the developing world, where there's a huge surplus of youth and everybody's poor and there's widespread unemployment, there probably isn't going to be the income or even the economic rationale to vastly extend people's lives.
There are 5 billion people in the third world. Should the economics of the free market deny them access to this technology? We've always presumed that because we own the technologies, it should be our economic system which decides whose life gets extended and whose doesn't.
We can easily find ourselves in a place where there are vast differences in longevity between the haves and have-nots in this world. And that this, of course, not only creates a generation gap, but creates a resentment between the live and the live-nots.
Sensible human societies have always assessed appropriate technologies as those which could be accessible to all, would not create a technological apartheid and through it an economic apartheid and through it a biological apartheid between the lives and the lives not, between those who have to live, those who can be helped to survive, and the rest who must be allowed to die.
The problem is that the gap between what science is delivering and what economics can share out is cavernous and widening. The new medicine is already more than just the repair of old organs and tissues. At Dr. Ukama's company Geron, they want the repaired organs to be young again, to actually reverse aging and wind the clock back, right down at the level of the cells the repaired organs are made of. And they've already begun. So what are we looking at here?
Those are the old skin cells. When they reach their end of lifespan, they flatten in senescence. And here I will show you some cells, the same donor cell, but we put a telomerase gene, and you can see how morphologically they look different. We put a telomerase gene into every single cell of those skin.
And it made them young.
And made them young, and they multiplied.
The telomerase gene is the key to cellular rejuvenation.
Telomeres, the ends of chromosomes, are the molecular clock which shorten each time a cell divides, thereby measuring or counting the number of times that cell is divided. So when the telomere reaches a critically short point, bells and whistles go off in the cell that says, I can't divide anymore.
And when our cells no longer divide and renew, we age.
The telomerase enzyme simply adds back DNA to the telomere, thereby resetting the mitotic clock, if you will, so that the end product are youthful, robust cells that frankly may outlast the life of the patient to whom they're going.
No, picked up an egg.
This is the final piece of the cell biology revolution. By adding telomere technology to stem cells, when your organs are regrown, they'll be healthy and they will be young again.
Yeah, the DNA has been removed from that egg now, so it's been enucleated.
It's one thing to make single cells in a test tube young again. The question is, can we regrow whole organs and tissues from these rejuvenated cells? The first attempt to answer that question has already been made in one of the most iconic experiments of the last decade.
We take a cell which has got a specific function. In the case of Dolly, it was mammary tissue, and which has got a specific age. And by putting the genetic information from that cell into an egg, the whole thing goes back to the beginning. So that it's able, what was a mammary cell is able to produce all of the different tissues of an adult: skin, wool, muscles, digestive tract, reproductive organs and everything. So in that sense it resets the clock. But it probably also resets the clock so that she will have a normal lifespan. So in both very important ways we go right back to the beginning.
And this is the real significance of cloning.
We'll now search for a suitable cell which will be transferred through that hall.
Taking a cell at the end of its life and effectively rewinding its telomere clock back to the time when it had the full power of an embryonic stem cell to create any organ or tissue with its life in front of it.
And then we'll use an electric current to fuse those two cells together.
I think that one of the advantages of thinking of producing stem cells from cloned embryos is that they would be young again, as it were. That they would have a full normal lifespan ahead of them. So that, for example, if you were trying to offer neurons for a patient who's Parkinson's disease, who's already 50 or 60 years old. You would be able to take some of his cells, clone to produce an embryo, produce stem cells, produce neurons from those stem cells, and offer them to the patient, knowing that they had a full normal lifespan ahead of them and that they were not equivalent to the cells of a man who was already 60 years old. And that is one of the important advantages.
If we're to believe the scientists, then they're offering us the unbelievable. A practical route towards something not far short of immortality. Even if the scientists achieve only a fraction of what they think they can achieve, then major social change is on its way.
My fear is that extreme technologies, which could potentially extend the lifespan, would be highly prized and valued and coveted, and therefore made out of the reach of most of us and delivered to an elite class, economically, socially, whatever. And that creates, I think, a very unstable situation.
The big question is, what are the political impacts of this growing divide, this growing generation gap between rich and poor? And I think you can sketch it out two ways. One is, of course, that you have more integration, that the aging rich countries and the youthful emerging market countries become more integrated, so that there's the labor intensive activities are performed in the third world, and the high value added work increasingly is done in the developed world. A lot of investment flows back and forth, and it's a very happy symbiotic relationship. We gradually lift the developing countries up to a much higher standard of living in the process.
Brace for impact. No one could have landed that plane like I did.
Eu sou a Belmotta e a gente se encontra na próxima edição de Clips. Até já.